So to start, I want to put the research in the broader context of school integration strategies. So for about 20 years now, TCF has supported research on school districts and some charter schools that consider socioeconomic status of students in assignment in order to promote school integration. And so as we've been tracking these school integration efforts, in our latest inventory, we identified 100 districts and charters that use that type of strategy. And within the different approaches, the most common thing that school districts are doing is redrawing attendance zone boundaries. 40 out of the 100 districts that we identified use that strategy. But all of the other types of school integration strategies involve some form of choice. And so when we're talking about the role that charter schools can play in integration, it's part of this broader idea of how we can leverage types of public school choice to create more diverse schools. Next slide. So just to give you a sense of what it means to have choice-based school integration, there are a couple of big buckets. One strategy is magnet schools. They're magnet schools that are drawing students from a wide geographic area. They have special themes that are adopted specifically to bring together diverse groups of families and use intentional recruitment and sometimes diversity as a part of the mechanism of deciding who's admitted from the lottery. Transfer policies is another way to use choice to promote school integration. There are transfer policies, for example, that give a preference for low-income students who are transferring to more affluent schools, transfer policies within schools in a district, or transfer policies that are partnerships to cross district lines. District-wide equitable choice systems, or sometimes called controlled choice systems, are also another strategy. So under this mechanism, a district gets rid of having geographic attendance zone boundaries and instead makes all enrollment choice-based. So families rank their school preferences, and then students are assigned based on those preferences and an algorithm that makes sure that all schools in the district roughly reflect the diversity of that district overall. And then finally, another big bucket is charter schools. The flexibility that charter schools have to adopt themes, to use their recruitment and their enrollment strategies to bring students from a wider geographic area together are tools that, if they are designed with diversity in mind, can be used as a force for school integration. So our research is looking at charter schools that are intentionally diverse and that could help promote school integration. There have been some media reports over the last few years about some of these schools. My colleague Richard Collenberg and I profiled a number of schools in our book, A Smarter Charter, a few years ago. There's also the Diverse Charter Schools Coalition, started several years ago, that brings together schools that self-identify as diverse. But so far, there hasn't been an effort to systematically survey the charter school sector and try to identify how many of these schools there are. So that's the work that we undertook in this new report. So we defined intentionally diverse, or diverse by design, as combining a commitment to diversity with diversity in enrollment. And we undertook then to look at the charter school landscape and find schools that had this combination of commitment and enrollment. So we looked at data from our federal data set from 2014-15, the latest year of data available at the time, to look at roughly 7,300 charter schools that were part of that data. And together with a team of research assistants, we reviewed the websites of all of these charter schools to look for signs that diversity is part of the mission and design of the school. In addition to that, we sent a follow-up survey to a subset of schools to learn more about their diversity and enrollment practices. And then we also conducted an analysis of schools' diversity using the demographic data available from that data set. So we looked at schools' school-level diversity. We considered schools to be socioeconomically diverse if 30 to 70% of students in the school were low income, and racially diverse if no single racial or ethnic group made up more than 70% of the student body. And finally, we also compared schools to the districts that they are located in. And for this comparison, we considered schools to be roughly representative of the school district if they fell within a 15 percentage point range above or below the district average for enrollment of low-income students or enrollment of the largest racial or ethnic group. So these were some pretty broad strokes to try and determine what charter schools had some of these elements together to meet our definition of diverse by design. I'll give you a sense of what this looks like in practice. Here's one example of what strong commitment to diversity on a charter school's website looked like. This is from Blackstone Valley Prep, a school in Rhode Island, a network of schools. You can see here from this quote from their website, and it includes a statement, "By design, our network is intentionally diverse. We accept students from 4 unique sending districts." They talk about the commitment that's part of their mission and about some of the strategies that they use to actually achieve diverse enrollment. And similarly, here's an example of what it looks like to actually have high diversity in enrollment based on the metrics that we have. Here's an example. DSST Green Valley Ranch High School is a school in Denver, part of the DST Public Schools Network. And they met our criteria for both school level diversity. They fell within our range for low income enrollment. They're 69% low income, no racial or ethnic group at the school exceeds 70%. And they also fall very close to their district enrollment. In this case, they fall within 1 percentage point of enrollment in Denver public schools for low-income students, and they match the enrollment of Hispanic students in the district. So using a combination of those measures, we considered schools to be diverse by design if they met our highest bar on either commitment or diversity in enrollment, and then met at least a middle bar on the other measure. So what this looks like in practice on this matrix here is these 3 cells here that are shaded yes. So if you had that combination of a strong commitment or a visible commitment and high diversity, or at least medium diversity in your school, we considered these schools to be diverse by design. And based on these metrics, we identified a total of 125 schools that met this category. And you can see from this map here that they were all over the US. They were located in 27 different states. So we estimate that the growth of the number of diverse charter schools, we estimated that using the year that schools opened. So we hope that this inventory will provide a baseline to measure growth moving forward as we look at what happens to charters in future inventories. But to estimate at this time, we looked just to see when schools had opened and how that compared to the total number of charter schools that existed. So what we see is that the percentage of the charter sector that met our diverse by design changed over time. So 18 schools on this list were open in the year 2000 or earlier, which at that time represented less than 1% of the charter school sector. But by 2014, 125 schools, all of the schools on the list, represented almost 2% of the charter schools open that year. So I think there are 2 messages here. One, 2% of the charter sector is a small slice, and I think this confirms what we have seen in other research suggesting that by and large, integration has not been a focus for the charter school sector. However, we also do see growth of this group that we think merits attention. And finally, our inventory also pointed to some broader trends in the charter school sector related to diversity. So 1 in 5 schools that we included in our survey showed some consideration of diversity in their school model. So even the schools that had some consideration and didn't meet any of our metrics for diverse enrollment might be candidates to think about how they address their enrollment and recruitment strategies, and there could be good candidates for becoming more diverse. Similarly, 1 in 4 charter schools met our criteria for medium or high diversity in enrollment. And again, many of those schools didn't have any visible commitment to diversity in their mission or design that we could find, but there could be lessons to learn from what factors it is that have facilitated diverse enrollment in those schools as we think about charter and district policies moving forward. So with that, I'm going to hand things over to my colleague, Kimberly Quick, who's the co-author on this research, to talk a little bit more about what we learned from some of these diverse charter schools and share some of the information from some of the case studies of diverse charter schools that we'll also be publishing.
Thank you, Hallie. Like she said, my name is Kimberly Quick. and I'm the co-author of the study. I just wanted to pick up on what Hallie said by looking a little bit more deeply at the variety within 125 schools that we found. We can go to the next slide. Great. So as you see, a large number of, actually a full 30% of our diverse by design schools in our list are located in the state of California. This makes sense. California is first in the nation in terms of charter school enrollment generally, and the state's charter law requires that schools address ways to achieve a racial or ethnic balance that reflects the surrounding area of the school. And the states that you see here in this little box host the states that host the most diverse charters are home typically to at least one intentionally diverse charter school network, which is helping to drive up those numbers in the states listed. Most charter schools in our list are located in the cities or in the suburbs, with larger cities being the most likely to host diverse charter schools per our definition. Large urban and suburban areas are more likely to already have diverse populations living within them, or might have a housing or transportation infrastructure that makes integrating schools easier. Having said that, we did find that 10% of the schools on our list are located in rural areas or in towns, which points to the fact that this work is possible and important all across America. The schools in our list are, on average, smaller than other public schools, with a mean size of 359 students. That's compared to 482 students for public elementary schools and about 700 for public secondary schools. Almost half of the schools on our list of 125 are also part of charter school networks. 11 of the diverse charter schools on our list have a low income enrollment that's greater than 70%, but are representative of their districts in terms of race and socioeconomic status. But all but 2 have no racial or ethnic group that makes up more than 70% of the student body, and half have no racial or ethnic majority. As you see, the low income, let me stop turning my head away from this. As we see, the low income enrollment ranges from 31 to 89%, and the median is 53% for low income enrollment, which reflects about what America looks like. And as you see, there are a number of different pedagogical approaches that these schools use. A number of them are progressive in nature, but not all. And there are some schools featured here that have very, very different approaches and have looked at their locality, looked at the parents and the communities that they're serving, and have designed strategies and theories of education that appeal to the families within that area. We can go to the next slide. We also know that diversity, while important, does not guarantee equity. We know that school diversity alone isn't enough. Tracking, or the practice of designating students for separate educational paths based presumably on their past educational performance, contributes to test score gaps. And federal investigations and research have both indicated that it's not always tightly correlated with prior academic performance or preparation, and that it does have a disparate racial impact. Recently released reports from the Department of Education using data from the 2015-2016 academic year showed, as data has showed for quite some time, significant racial disparities in disciplinary referrals and actions and in access to advanced coursework. The recent data shows that Black students comprise about 16% of high school enrollment nationally, but just 8% of calculus enrollment. Latinx students made up 24% of high school enrollment and just 16% of calculus enrollment. Black and Native students were disproportionately likely to take Algebra 1 in high school and even into junior and senior year, which makes it difficult to take advanced math courses. That same study found that Black boys made up a quarter of all students suspended, and Black girls made up 14%, even though they each accounted for about 8% of all students. So we see that these things remain challenges, but luckily the charter schools that we profiled and many of the ones that we looked at took steps to address that. I just wanted to acknowledge a really important and interesting framework that some of our partners in this work have come up with. Integrate NYC is a youth-led organization that stands for integration and equity in New York City schools, and they came up with a broader way to think about integration and diversity and its importance. They're going to talk about this a little bit later, so I'm not going to go into depth. But their 5 elements are race and enrollment, the idea that public schools should reflect the diversity of the area, resource allocation, just equitable distribution of resources, representation of staff, relationships across group identities, schools taking action to build relationships, including through the use of curriculum, and restorative practices, which lead to demilitarized school spaces, and protecting the humanity of each student. I also wanted to acknowledge some of the strategies that these schools use to achieve diverse enrollment. A weighted lottery, where a school can reserve a percentage of seats for low-income students or students from underserved geographic areas, was used by a number of schools that we profiled. Intentional location, being really thoughtful about where you place a school building if you have that luxury, in either an already diverse neighborhood or a place where families will add diversity, live or work. Targeted outreach, participating in fairs, parades, open houses, and then beginning early. Morris Jeff, which is one of the schools that we profiled, has a preschool program, and while they don't use a weighted lottery later on in their admissions, they funnel a weighted preschool program into their upper grades. And then finally, I've listed, on the next slide, a number of things that schools are doing to sort of disrupt some of the negative patterns that I mentioned earlier that are barriers to equity. So these schools oftentimes will encourage relationship building through school day structure and collaborative activities. They'll make efforts to resist academic tracking. They're having partnerships with local colleges or universities or programs to increase diversity in schools with staff. And they're investing in interventions to help scaffold students without placing them into different classrooms. And you can read about that in a number of profiles, and 4 profiles that will be coming out both today and in the next couple of weeks that my colleagues and I have written about. With that, I think we have time for just a couple of questions, and I invite my colleague Hallie back up.
Don't be shy.
Hi, my name is Leah Cruzy. Excuse me. I run a political action committee called Allies for Educational Equity, and thank you for your scholarship here. I'm curious about this lower left-hand quadrant of the high diversity and enrollment and commitment not evident. There are 10 times as many schools that showed up in this category, and I'm just curious what you may have found when you dug into that. It looks like 5% of the total schools included in the study.
Yeah, so commitment not evident means there was nothing that we could find in their website, and if they were a school that was targeted for receiving a follow-up survey, there was nothing in the follow-up survey that made it evident that diversity was part of the mission or the design of the school. Now, it's possible that some of those schools do have that commitment, that it's something that is either conveyed with the parents during school tours or in printed material, or something that is internal to the way that a school is run but not really communicated publicly. So it's important to note that commitment not evident doesn't mean that commitment isn't there. But having said that, I think that's consistent with a lot of what we have seen in charter schools more generally, that this hasn't been a big focus, and frankly, it hasn't been a focus in public schools of a variety of different settings. So I think part of what's interesting in that group is to think about if there is diverse enrollment, but not necessarily a commitment, what are the particular factors in the community or in the charter policies that have enabled diverse enrollment to take place in those schools. There might be some lessons around the types of policies that we put in place other places that can encourage diversity in all types of schools, even if this isn't a core tenet when starting the school at the beginning.
Abel McDaniels, Center for American Progress. I'm curious if you guys uncovered any policy framework that encourages these diverse schools to move from diversity to equity, especially the curricular scaffolding as opposed to tracking?
Yeah. So that's a very good question. As far as a policy framework for that portion, I didn't see anything that was a pattern, right? Obviously, charter policy and school policy changes dramatically from state to state. There were schools, particularly around discipline, that were responding to Obama-era guidance that's now up for debate, that were thinking very critically about disparate impact and disproportionality around exclusion of students with special needs and students of color. I have found in the schools that were really struggling with that, this was something that they were thinking about even before that guidance came out. Regarding detracking, I didn't see that there was any policy framework that particularly led schools to do that work. Typically, the schools that were taking pains to make sure that their students were not sorted into different classrooms had that as an idea at their founding, and were sort of fighting back against, as the school became more diverse and more affluent parents wanted access, fighting back against maybe a push to move into a more tiered system. But I hope that there will be more policy levers in the future to make sure that equity is paramount.
I think we'll do, is it one more question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Jasmine Oki from the American Federation of Teachers. You were kind of getting to it in your response just then, and I think a little bit going towards the first question at my table. When we look at the role of open enrollment in some of the charter schools where they sit, did you uncover any overlap there, as well as the role of gentrification in cities and urban areas where the actual city population is changing and affluent parents are being attracted to charter schools, which historically served predominantly Black and low-income students? Thanks.
That's a great question. In terms of the geographic locations, we didn't look specifically at any patterns of gentrification in locations. The data that we came up with would be ripe for that type of analysis, so I think that would be an interesting follow-up. The fact that so many of these schools are located in urban areas, I think, isn't an accident. It has to do with trends in charter schools more broadly, but probably also with places where you have the type of diversity in a community or demographic change that might be facilitating this. And one of the things that I also hear, I think, in your question that's really important to point out is that this work was really focused on looking at schools that have committed to creating diverse schools at a school level. We have also done work profiling what they do within a school, so going beyond just having a desegregated school body to really having an integrated school. There's also another direction that you need to move. So beyond just the school level, you need to move smaller to see, do we really have integration and opportunities for students of all backgrounds within a school. You also need to think bigger in terms of school systems. And so one of the things that I think as we think, especially from a policy perspective, what it would mean to use charter schools as one of the tools for school integration more broadly is to think about how the ecosystem of all different types of public schools promotes integration as a whole. And that means more than just having one diverse school. It means you need to have some type of coordination and plan for schools across a broader area. And that's a huge, important part of the work, and one that I think is still largely underdeveloped, especially in the charter sector. Okay.
Go ahead.
We'll have so many other question times during the day, but I know we're already a little behind in the morning.
We're getting the...
So I'm going to hand it over to our colleague Denise, who is going to kick off. Oh, before that, importantly, need to make a commitment with some public accountability. I did already make it, but I guess if I share it, then maybe it will be better about following through. So, as Denise shared, we're encouraging folks in the room to think about commitments. I will share a commitment that I'm making, which is to work on bringing the perspectives of students with disabilities into our work on school diversity. Our work so far has focused really on socioeconomic status and race and ethnicity, and we intend to continue using those lenses, but there are many other lenses, and this is one of them that I think is so important when we think about what it actually means to have diversity within a school.
Thank you. And my commitment is somewhat similar. I commit to elevating the voices of young people and their fight for equity in this work. And I think we've tried to do some of that here at this conference, and there are some young people around here, and I encourage you to talk to them, get to know them, ask them their questions and what they need, because they really are the experts of their own experience, and they're the ones that are going to lead us to the country that we need to be in the future. Thank you. All right.